Welcome back to Solar Fest Live. Um, we're pleased to have Jesse McDougall, a farmer and co-founder of the Regenerative Food Network, returning to Solar Fest this year. Jesse joins us from Studio Hill Farm to highlight and discuss the obstacles farmers face when making the transition to new farm management styles and how we might overcome them. But before Jesse starts, I'd like to thank the Regenerative Food Network for their support for SolarFest and for making this presentation possible. RFN is an innovative catalyst for the good food system by identifying local partners that are doing great work in their communities and empowering them with finance, infrastructure, and technology. You can get more information at regenfood.net. And finally, please enter any questions or comments into the chat using the button at the bottom of the screen. At the end of the session, Jesse will have time to answer just some of your questions. So thank you, Jesse, for doing this.
My pleasure. Thank you. It's great to be back at SolarFest. I really appreciate everything you guys do. So I don't have any slides today, so we're going to have, I'll identify the barriers. This is the first time I've given this barriers presentation. And I'll identify what aren't barriers, and we'll talk about my experience in transitioning a farm to regenerative ag. And at the end, I'll open it up for questions and happy to have a discussion. So it's an hour-long session. I'll probably talk for 30 or 40 minutes, and then we'll have 20 minutes at the end to talk. Everybody. I just want to say thank you to everybody for coming. I appreciate you coming out on a sunny Saturday. It means a lot. So like Mike said, I am co-owner and a farmer at Studio Hill in Shaftesbury. We're a 5th generation family farm, and we've been through every manner or every management style in those 5 generations. We're now a Savory Institute influencer hub. I'm an accredited holistic management professional and co-founder of the Regenerative Food Network, though I did not have nothing to do with the sponsorship of this session, though I appreciate it. I just learned about it now. I think to start off, I just want to say that these are complex systems that we're dealing in when we talk about farms and farming and food systems and local economies. There are more factors and variables than any person can predict or name. So it's a very tricky balancing act to get a farm launched of any type, and particularly a farm that's trying to do new things or ancient things again, new as in haven't been done in this current system of food production. And there are, there's the farm system, there's the processing infrastructure, there's the economic system, there's the family in which you're working, and all of these systems have to work together. They have to reinforce one another. They have to grow stronger together. If one of those pieces, if the system that we're building doesn't work for one of those pieces, then the system will fail. That's what we mean by holistic approach. We have to think about the whole kit and caboodle, as they say, when starting or transitioning a farm to regenerative agriculture. We started our transition in 2012. My wife and I took over management here at Studio Hill. It's a 270-acre farm. We were a dairy, as many of the small family farms in Vermont were. Most were until about 1963, and then we were a hay farm and horse boarding operation, but our agricultural production was hay, and it was done conventionally with all the chemicals and all the heavy tillage and all the corn rotations and stuff that's very popular in this area. And I've talked about this at previous Solar Fest, so I won't go into it too long, but we didn't know what we were doing, or we didn't know what we were getting into when we made the decision to go quote unquote organic. That's how we saw it at the time. We put down all the chemicals, we put down all the tillage, and we planted everything back to grass that had been in corn. And that started our swift and punishing education in how to farm. Many farmers, one of the barriers that I'll talk about later is that many farmers don't have the luxury to experiment on their land because economic factors force them to keep doing what they're doing. And to risk, if a farm is operating on the edge of a knife, risking straying right or left to change what they're doing is a huge risk and could take down the whole operation. In our case, we didn't know what we were doing, so experimentation wasn't. It was a necessity, in which we were able to luxuriate. I guess is the word. It felt a lot more like panic, but when we kicked the crutches out of the fertilizers and pesticides and reseeding, the farm couldn't produce our crop anymore, our hay crop anymore. In the acres that were most recently corn, they didn't produce at all. And in the acres that had been most recently hay, we're getting worse and worse year over year. So 2013, we lost crops. 2014, we lost crops. And thank goodness we had the horse boarding business. It wasn't a gangbusters business. It was the locals horse boarding barn. But it was enough to keep the lights on. And we all had jobs in town during that transition to keep the lights on and to keep the horses fed and ourselves, able to put gas in the car. It was a very lean time and very scary. I'm happy to say we're through that now. Things are looking up. And so what I'm going to talk about is, are there barriers we ran up against in making that transition from very lean collapse times to now where we're seeing abundance again in the landscape, and that is translating to economic breathing room, I'll call it, because we're not getting rich, but we're able now to have a cushion and some resilience there. And going into this, I thought the barriers would be the demand for the food we were producing. I was looking around the local area and I saw great farms in the area. I found it terrifying to run up against established, wonderful farms that are doing such a great job. And so I thought, if we produce this, is anybody going to buy it? The local market is well served. And that is true. The local market is very well served. But it turns out the demand for regenerative food is not the problem. The demand for regenerative food is through the roof right now. Regenerative organic, particularly. Not just in the local area, but also in regional urban areas, at institutions, and in big corporations like Patagonia and Timberland and Eileen Fisher and other places that need to justify the ecological. I don't want to say justify. They want to be able to defend the production of their goods ecologically. So right now we're at a wonderful point in time where the demand for regenerative goods and food is far exceeds the supply. So there's a huge opportunity there. Another one of my assumptions was that transitioning a farm from what we were doing to what we want to do on the land would be hugely expensive. And it turns out the on-farm infrastructure for what we're doing now, which is pasture-raised livestock, is actually not that hard. It's not that expensive. It's all lightweight infrastructure. It's mobile electric netting fencing. It's a few wagons and some water tanks and a truck. So this can be done on as without breaking the bank. So it can be added to an existing farm enterprise pretty lightly, or it can be done on fallow land that is just sitting there, or getting bush hogged 2 times a year, extra second homeowner land. It can be done without much startup costs in terms of equipment. And as I just mentioned, the other barrier that a lot of people see as a barrier, but I've found actually isn't, is access to land. I assume this would be a huge barrier for people trying to get into farming. But as I've poked around, I've found thousands and thousands of acres just around Bennington alone, where second homeowners or farmers who are unable to get to every piece of their property are willing to lease that land out, or just in the case of second homeowners, stop paying the guy who comes in bush hogs and allow young farmers, or any farmers of any age, I guess, to regenerate their property. So those three things I haven't found to be a problem. The bigger issues that I've found, and we'll go through these one by one, have been emotional barriers, because it's an interesting culture we live in, and doing something new is often difficult. So there are some pieces to that we'll go through. Education has been a barrier. Learning how to do something that not a lot of people are doing was difficult in 2012. I mean, I called every farmer I knew. Obviously, some people knew, but I wasn't able to find them, and asked them, how do I manage 100 acres of hay field without chemicals? And even organic farming organizations said, if you figure that out, let us know. We'd love to know. Now, today, there are great options for education for people looking to get into this. I'm thrilled to say. And then, of course, there are economic barriers to transitioning or starting a regenerative ag operation. And we'll go through those. And then there's the regional infrastructure barriers. So I'm looking at this as barriers at every level, from the farmer, the individual or individuals starting the farm, to the farm itself, to the regional area. So there are barriers at every level, but the barriers are coming down very quickly as people understand the need and the demand for this food stays strong, food and goods, for which I'm very grateful. So I'll just start with the emotional, then I'll go to the education, then we'll go to the economic, and then we'll talk about infrastructure at the end. And if we have time, I have a little kind of a step-by-step analysis of a good way to get started. And if we don't have time for that, I can make that publicly available later. So for me personally, I'm not particularly thick-skinned. I never have been. I wear my heart on my sleeve. And so when we started experimenting up here on the hill with new ways of doing it, of farming in the area, there were comments, we were derided, We were called names. It was tough and it hurt, and especially because I didn't know that we were right, and it was scary, and we were going broke very fast. But we were very stubborn because we had just lost um, my wife's aunt, who had run the farm in the third generation of the family, to very terrifying cancer, and we didn't want to. And she loved Roundup, loved it. Put on backpacks and went and sprayed all the hedgerows and said it smelled sweet in the air, and that terrified us. And so that's why we made the decision we made, that there might be a connection between her cancer and the chemicals that were on the land. So we were very stubborn, and just kind of took the beating from local stick in the muds. And so you have to kind of not hopefully not so much now, not that it's many years later, but decide for yourself if you're ready to take some slings and arrows, and decide not you can't decide that they're not going to hurt, but decide if you're going to keep going through them or not. And all I can tell you is every farmer I've talked to who has spent 3 years transitioning will never go back, because the proof on the land speaks for itself. Particularly in this bioregion in the Northeast, where we still have water, and it takes much longer in drier climates to start seeing the benefits of holistic management or regenerative practices. But in this region, people say in 3 years we're producing more, we're spending less. We'll never go back, and that is really good. I'll say protective armor against the comments, because you can say nothing and know you're right, or say come see what we're doing, which has been my approach. And also going into this, you're not going to, you're going against not only the local culture, local farming culture sometimes, but going against the culture at large, where you're not going to get rich and you're not going to get famous. And I know that's a motivator for many people today in the social media, in the age of social media. And I'm not gonna lie, it was for me too. I thought I was um, the story of my own life, and it was my job to go get rich or famous or do something big. And joining a generational story and joining the story of the land, through luck, I fell in love with a girl who was nice enough to marry me. It relieved me of the burden of trying to get rich or famous or do anything other than take good care of where I was, which now I view as the ultimate success. But that was a huge paradigm shift, for me, and a relief when it hit, but it was a shift. And farming is not what you see on Instagram. And I would argue, nor should it be. It is hard work. It is every day. And if you find energy in that, if you find that it is, good for you and good for your soul, you can keep going forever. And that's what I found. I'm at the right place at the right time, doing the right things. Through some fluke of the universe, I ended up here. So, but it's not for everybody who learns about it on Instagram and isn't ready to get up at 4 a.m. every day and be covered in manure, or dirt or whatever it is you're working in. I happen to love it. So, but that's a barrier to a lot of people, and you got to think about whether you're ready for it. Another barrier, which isn't as big as most people make it out to be, is the old farmer mentality, I'll call it, where this is what we do, this is how we've always done it, this is how we're going to do it. That's People talk about that barrier, but I've never run into it. Old, uh, there is family culture you got to deal with. There is, if you're in a generational farming family, as we are, there is, well, we never did it that way. There's a moment where that happens. And then, but always the proof is in the pudding, and when the fields start coming back quicker and taller and more abundantly, uh, you know, doubters clam up, first of all. And second of all farmers are hurting right now. All farmers are desperate for something better than what's going on right now, and willing to change if there's something promising on the horizon. I mean, that's why you saw hemp planted all through the dairy farms at least in my part of the state. Farmers you wouldn't think would ever grow hemp or planting it right and left. There's a willingness to try new things, and so that isn't as much as a barrier as it's made out to be, but it is there. And the farmer last emotional barrier that a farmer going into this has to wrestle with is burnout, because it is all day, it is every day, and it is putting out fires, and you do have to wear many hats. If you're the kind of person who thrives on that, it can work. If you're the kind of person who can actually schedule a vacation and then go take a vacation, it could work. But that's something you have to be aware of and plan for, because you can't do it alone and you can't do it all day, every day. This has to work. As I said, if we're looking at this holistically, the farm has to work for the farmer, as well as the animals, as well as the landscape, as well as the local economy, as well as the larger regional economy, and so on and so forth. If the farmer breaks, there's no farm, and if the farmer makes it easy on themselves by cramming, by mistreating the animals, then the animals break and it doesn't work anymore in the long term. So, or on the land, if they take too much out of the land, you can't externalize the work just as you can't externalize the costs. Okay, so once you get through all those, if you still decide you want to do it, and I really recommend that you do if you're leaning that way already, then you need to get an education in, not so much in practices. You don't have to go to school to learn how to move fencing. You may already be great with livestock, but what I really recommend people do is begin looking into holistic management and the ability to read a landscape. Now, farmers who have been doing this their whole lives can do that very well. New farmers coming into this, such as myself, don't know anything or very little. I mean, and I say that from a place of knowing. I sat down and Googled what is grass when I started farming, when I found myself to be a grass farmer. And it was with years of failure and YouTube and training with the Savory Institute that I learned what it means when I see moss growing in a field, or what it means when I see the grass dying on, standing and turning brown and then turning gray. There are indicators of what's going on in your ecosystem that you need to be able to learn. You need to be able to identify and learn what they mean and what they are indications of, so that you can make decisions in your unique landscape, given the tools at your disposal and the assets at your disposal. So because context matters, right? So the learning the tools is important, learning the practices is important. Those are easy to learn, and most people don't need. Most people can find that out on their own. But because every ecosystem is unique. Every ecosystem needs to be read, right? So the tools and practices that I use up here on this hilltop farm to regenerate this hilltop farm, bring back the soil, bring back the biodiversity, clean and filter the water. If I take those and move them to Utah, could very easily decimate that ecosystem down there because it's drier, it's got different, species in it, it is different soil type. So it's not a plug and play proposition. One size does not fit all. There is no regenerative farm, quote unquote, that is defined by practices. So to say, yeah, they're no-till, or yeah, they are pasture-based livestock, or yeah, they are, I don't know, anything else, does not define that as a regenerative farm. The practices may or may not in that ecosystem regenerate that ecosystem. It depends on what had evolved there over the last hundreds of thousands of years and what the ecosystem responds to. So, and even more close to home, what I do on this hilltop farm with wet rolling hills is very different than what happens at my neighbor's farm down at the bottom of the valley where they have riverland, right? So what they can get away with down there, in terms of moving the animals, when and how long the people, geez, that's when you're too close to your animals. How long animals stay in one spot, they can leave them there a lot longer than I can, because if my animals stay in one spot too long, they could be pushing topsoil down off the hill. Erosion's a bigger problem for me than them. So it's the important thing to learn is how to read a landscape, understand that the tools and practices that you use are not determined by what you want to raise or what you feel like doing alone. They're determined by what will regenerate the landscape. For example, we've had cows on this land, we've had horses on this land. We are now raising sheep and lamb, not because it was a market decision. Turns out it was a great market decision because there's an underserved demand for lamb and sheepskins, but we chose sheep because they're light per animal weight, and distributed weight of the flock can flow over our mountain, our wet rolling hills very well. So the tool, meaning the livestock, or the practice, meaning and I should say livestock, perennial crops, fruit trees, bushes, berries, whatever you choose to farm regeneratively, that has to work for the farmer. I hate bending over, so I didn't want to get into vegetables. My gut gets in the way. And the animals are, they tend to be easier for me. So it worked for me, it worked for the landscape, and it worked for the local area. So we checked those three boxes. Work for the, what was needed, the demand in the area. But the tools and practices are determined by the landscape and the, I would say first, and then the farmer, then the economy. But they, the best ones, the ones that will work long term, work for all three. So once you decide to do it, once you learn how to do it and how to make decisions and how to read a landscape, so you know when you're messing up and when you're succeeding, which is an unbelievably powerful skill to have, and one that I'm still working on, but has been fun to learn, and rewarding to learn, because you see things as obvious as the butterflies coming back, or the birds coming back, or the deer or the turkeys. That's all great, but then you can see the right, quote unquote, species of plants coming in, and the what we call weeds getting pushed out and everything moving in the right direction. So then you've got the farm and the farmer. All right. Then you have to start looking at the economic barriers to this. As I said earlier, most farms can't risk experimentation, right? So that is a huge barrier that we have to address as a community, as a society, as a region. Farms are stuck. Many farms are stuck. I won't say all farms. Many farms are stuck in that they have huge millions and millions of dollars invested in infrastructure, whether that's a dairy barn or a combine or whatever, that usually they're still paying for. And to get out of that business while they're still paying for it is either terrifying or impossible or both. So we have to figure out how to help those farmers transition, because it's not working for them in so many ways, and it's not working for the environment. One of the approaches RFN is taking is helping to define a market or find the demand for a product, such as, I don't know, lamb or sheepskins. I'll just say that because that's what I do. But and then talking to farmers and asking them if they would consider transitioning not their whole land, but 10% of their land to try this new product on their land. So if they have 1,000 acres, it could be 10, it could be 1% of their land, it could be 100 acres. So you don't put the whole thing at risk, right? And if every year you transition 10%, and because we have worked through RFN, Regenerative Food Network, from the sale at the customer level down back through to the farmer level, the products the farmers are raising are already sold, right? And for good margins, because RFN runs the tannery, they run the slaughterhouse, they run the distribution. All the middlemen, so to speak, all the companies in the middle are good local companies employing local people with good jobs, but they're not profit centers. That's the key. Profits go to the farmers, profits go to the eaters on the other end in the form of lower prices, so that we're trying to make local food more accessible locally, and get it out of Dodge through our distribution system to hit high paying markets in the cities and with these bigger companies that I mentioned earlier. So that with that system in place, we can go to the farmer and say, on these 100 acres, why don't you try lamb this year? Do it regeneratively. We'll help you build a plan. We'll help you find the education. We'll finance the education. We'll finance the transition. And farmers who have transitioned, after 3 years, like I said, say we'll never go back because the land is regenerating, but the land is profitable. And the more, I'll give you the case of what we're seeing here at Studio Hill. The more animals we have on the land, because our management is producing regeneration in the landscape, the more abundant the land becomes, which means the more animals we can put on the land, which means the more abundant the land becomes, which means it spirals up in the right direction. It's a positive feedback loop where we can get stronger and stronger over time. And when we show that to other farmers who have been getting weaker and weaker over time, it's very easy to see how this could work across their whole property. So there is the barrier of financing a farm startup or transition a farm to new practices. This was a huge problem 10 years ago. It is becoming less of a problem now. New funding organizations and granting organizations are coming online. RFN is one of them, and I'm proud of that. Another company is called Steward. They're at Steward. GoSteward.com or .co, something like that. And their whole thing is to make capital available to regenerative farms, where the money in farming, the finances available to giant farms in the Midwest, they can call up and get $1 million, pretty quickly because it's backed by the U.S. government. But the small farms have been struggling, um, to find money. Banks won't lend to ag producers. Credit unions more so, but still less. So that's tough. And if anybody's interested in finding financing, send me an email. I'll put my name in the chat, or my email in the chat, and I can point people to organizations that are starting to do this. The next question is, the barrier is, and this is the big one, how to earn a livable wage. And with that, I find food margins are slim, whether you're doing it for, direct to retail, or you're doing it for wholesale. I don't care how you're raising and selling. If you're raising on a small farm, it's expensive. Labor wise, the landscape's inefficient. It's not one tractor and one GPS controlled tractor managing 10,000 acres in the Midwest. We'll never be able to compete with that, with such an efficient land base in the Midwest. Doesn't mean we can't thrive, right? But it's going to be more expensive to raise the food, and we have to work under certain market constraints. So food margins are always slim, which is why I always say diversification on your farm is key to survival. We have 3 main businesses here on Studio Hill. The first is the livestock, the poultry and lamb operations, which are the cornerstone of everything. Then we have an Airbnb on the property, and we have consulting that we do. They all three, we call it the three legs of the stool that hold everything up. And we find resilience through diversification, economic resilience through diversification. For example, when COVID, the COVID restrictions swept through Vermont and the Airbnbs shut down, our Airbnb income went to zero overnight. I'm not complaining about that. I understood why, but it was hard to swallow as a small business. And luckily, at that same moment, our food sales went through the roof, because of the fact that the grocery stores were empty. So they were able to even each other out. Every farmer I've ever known has something else, and whether it's a job in town, a spouse who works in town, consulting, the book deal, they all have something else. Our something else is Airbnb and consulting. And they, people come here to the farm because it's a clean, rolling grass farm. So our farming has direct impact on our Airbnb. Our Airbnb sells our lamb and chicken very well, pardon me. And the consulting amplifies both. So we found a way for all our enterprises to reinforce one another. When you're planning your farm financially, and this goes back to burnout, one of the biggest barriers we ran into was getting big enough to hire somebody else to help us run the farm. My wife and I are not that young anymore. We have 2 children. We're building a house, and we're farming full time and running an Airbnb and consulting and burnout was, well, we burned out, I should say. Burnout wasn't just a risk, we burned out. And there's always that moment in small business growth where you aren't earning enough for 2 salaries, but you need to bring people on. So what we ended up doing was focusing on the Airbnb and the consulting businesses, um, and bringing somebody in to run livestock, which has been huge for us because it means we can take a vacation. So from the beginning, I recommend everybody plan on getting to a point pretty quickly, and you'll be living off no money and paying an employee more than you get paid in the early years, but it's worth it because that means you can keep going. And as your business grows, as ours has, your salary will fill in behind your employee's salary. But and hiring in this time at this moment is a nightmare, and I know that. We're blessed to have good help here, but we've been helped in that by the fact that we are a regenerative farm, and it is appealing to young people who want to work with purpose in their lives and want to get up every day and go and sequester carbon, and want to get up every day and go make the earth healthier. It's an inspiring gig. So we have actually been, I don't want to say inundated, but nearly inundated with resumes and requests for people for jobs. We can't hire everybody, but we've been lucky enough to have our pick. Let's see. Okay. Another key is another barrier. While we have found the local market for lamb and chicken for our products to be stronger than we expected, there is a low ceiling to it. So we sell all we raise, and if we wanted to raise more, we'd hit a ceiling pretty quickly. Bennington has, and maybe some of you heard me say this, we have 40 doctors and 40 professors that can afford to pay extra for locally raised regenerative food. And all the farms in the area are competing for those 40 doctors and 40 professors, and they can't buy the fancy food every time, right? So if we stayed small, we could service the local area, but we want to regenerate more land, and we want to bring more money into the farm and the area. So if we're going to grow, we have to find other markets, and that's a barrier because I don't want to spend my time every weekend when I'm supposed to be with my kids packing a truck and heading for farmers markets in New York City. It's too much time, it's too much expense, it's a bad system. I know people do it and they grind it out, and I tip my hat to them, but I see that as a huge barrier. Is access to better markets is poor, and the wholesaling landscape right now is poor. We're trying to address that with RFN, and in identifying the markets, putting producers in touch with those markets, either directly or through an RFN brand like Southshire Meats. But up till now and until this fully develops, the option is to buy a truck and drive to New York. Unless you're a dairy, the dairy trucks still run through the state, but you're losing money at that anyway. So that's a bigger barrier, and all I can recommend that we found is direct to consumer online, and you, depending on UPS and FedEx, to deliver overnight real quick your frozen food. That is what got us through COVID, is shipping boxes of food to people who were nervous about having enough. So there are clever ways around that, but you do have to find a web designer, and you have to, or go to shopify.com, and they do great e-commerce websites. But the traditional distribution models aren't working, and we're trying to turn that on its head at RFN. They aren't working for small farms. They're doing a great job getting grocery stores full of empty calories. All right, I've just 3 more minutes, and then we'll turn it over for questions. I just want to go through the last of this. So the next thing that we've done, which has really helped us a lot, has been minimizing inputs and minimizing waste. And by minimizing inputs, I mean when we transitioned to holistic management, organic management, we put down the expense of fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, seeding, tilling, disking, plowing, all the crop rotation and chemical inputs. And that was 5 figures a year. And we brought in the livestock to do the fertilization and do the revitalization and regeneration of the landscape, but they do it better after a few years because it's a slower process. It's not a chemical process, it's a biological process. But because it is a biological process, it builds on itself. So the effect is cumulative every year. And that they earn us money, they don't cost us money, right? So that was a huge shift for us. So minimizing inputs and then minimizing waste, right? So, and this goes into how we were able to turn a $300 lamb into a $700 lamb. With, I would take the lambs to the slaughterhouse and get paid for the meat on that animal. And then I'd watch the process, and the sheepskin would get thrown into a trash bag and sent to the rendering service, which I thought curious because there were just bags and bags and bags of these sheepskins going out of the back of the slaughterhouse. So I did some Googling and found the only organic tannery in North America in Randolph, Vermont, which we have since purchased and we're bringing down to Manchester, Vermont. Vermont natural sheepskins. And now we collect that waste stream of the sheepskins going out of the back of the plant. We tan them and we sell them online to, frankly, people in Brooklyn and people in the Bay Area for $300-400 a piece. So now, as a farmer, by capitalizing on that waste stream, I'm able to get paid not just for the meat coming off the animal, but the skin as well. And we're working on compost and bone broth and everything else to make sure that everything we produced on the land is capitalized and nothing goes into the waste stream unnecessarily. We certainly aren't polluting anything. And I should mention the tannery we bought is non-polluting, organic, no chemicals. It's a veggie tanning process that where the worst thing coming out of the tannery is salt. Okay, I'll just finish up here in the last 2 minutes. Okay, then the next level of barriers we're going to run into are infrastructure barriers, regional barriers where small farmers don't have access to the services they need to run profitably. For example, the creameries are few and far between, or not open to the community. The veggie storage, cold storage is few and far between. So farmers have to put them all up at their own farms. Meat processing, meat slaughter are few and far between. And if they are in the area, they're booked out till 2023, which means so many farmers getting into this have to travel unbelievable distances or bend themselves into pretzels to work with somebody else's schedule. So one of the key initiatives of RFN, and with others like the Vermont Co-op Collective, Food Co-op Collective, and other great organizations in the area, and even the Agency of Ag, has been to rebuild the infrastructure throughout the region. And I'm cheering it as loudly as I can because just anecdotally, we had a good poultry operation going Then the USDA plant Wilmington shut down, and our next option was to drive our birds to Rhode Island. If I was going to sell a chicken breast legally to my neighbor, I had to drive it 4 hours down, 4 hours back, 4 hours down to pick up, and 4 hours back, and that cut all my profits out of the chicken, because I can't sell a $50 chicken. I can only get away with so much. So those are coming online. The meat plant in Wilmington just came back online. As I said, the tannery is coming to Manchester. We're planning a big meat processing, food distribution, food storage facility in Bennington, and we have plans for RFN, I should say, has plans for 2 to 3 more local collection abattoir slaughterhouses throughout the region, meaning Vermont, New Hampshire, and Eastern New York. And once that hurdle is out of the way, that farmers can farm, drop off locally, and go back to farming, we can really start to see how this new, how all the barriers can be overcome, and that we can have a regional food system that regenerates the ecosystem, exports food to higher paying markets, imports money, and we can kind of reverse the effect of the big box stores in town that just suck money out of town. So it's 11:24. I've gone through a lot of a lot of barriers, and happy to open it up for questions. I see some in the chat, and if you want to unmute and Mike, if I'll ask you to unmute everybody. I don't know if they can do that individually. If you want to unmute and ask questions, that'd be great. But I'll start with this one from David. In the chat, he says, thanks so much for talking honestly about the emotional aspects of your decision. You're welcome. For the record, I also would like fame for the principled positions I try to take. But the support and respect you get from one person who's trying to be aware of do the right thing is so much more meaningful than 1,000 likes. Oh, that's not a question. That's just a great comment. That's true. Thank you, David. Dwayne asks, how is the Food Network funded if profits flow from other stakeholders? Great question. The Regenerative Food Network is a for-profit organization, right? But we operate everything that has traditionally taken profits from farmers and dumped that cost on eaters, for local food anyway, as minimally profitable. We keep only the profits we need for the business to grow and be solvent. We are funded by private investors, but we are a for-profit company. So we're starting Vermont Natural Sheepskins again, and that will earn profits from the people we're selling the skins to. We're starting Southshire Meats to be a regional collaborative meat brand where farmers can break free of competing against one another for local markets and collaborate on serving the needs of a larger market in Boston, in New York, in Montreal, in DC, in Albany. And that will be a for-profit company, and we'll have great dinner-ready food like, chicken sausage and hamburgers and lamb burgers and that kind of thing. So we'll make our profits there, but we won't be. There will no be. We're not producing the Tyson family out of this, right? The point of it is both to get farmers as heavy a check as possible, regenerate as many acres as possible, build a resilient food system that doesn't shut down when one meat plant in the Midwest shuts down or one processing center shuts down. And then make sure that the prices in the local areas are low enough that everybody can have access to nutrient-dense, healthy local food. Let's see. David asks. Yes. As I just said, one of the core tenets of our strategy is to get this more nutritious food into the hands of everybody, and we do that by selling it in more profitable markets. So if we're selling a chicken breast for $20 a pound in New York City, we can come home and sell it for $5 a pound and maybe lose money there. But we can offset that cost. Mike B asks, hi.
I'm zooming on SolarFest.
Mike B asks, excess nitrogen runoff on no-till farms has been reported as a potential pollution problem. Is that a real concern? I don't know. I'd have to look into the specifics of that study. I'm surprised. But as I said, no-till can mean a bunch of different things. And no-till does not mean healthy soil. And it does not mean booming ecosystem in itself. It could, but I'd have to look at that report. How did you choose the sheep breed? Well, Heidi, great question. And the answer is I didn't. We decided to get sheep. My wife and I decided our chicken business in the early days was booming and it was regenerating the land very well. And we wanted, but it was, we were only covering about 700 to 1,000 square feet of field every year. And we needed to cover acres and acres of field if we wanted this to be done in any reasonable time frame. And we did the math, and if we scaled up our chicken operation, we would have needed literally 1 million chickens on the land every year to cover the whole place. So we didn't want to do that. So we decided to get a lamb or two. And the next day, a woman knocked on our door and said, "Hey, I need a home for 45 sheep. Do you know anybody?" And we kind of swallowed hard and said, "We'll do it." And so the day the flock arrived, they came down off the trailer. And I said to the woman, "Well, it looks like we're in the wool business." And she shot me a glance like, you're nuts. And I was like, "What?" And she said, "This is a hair breed. These are Katahdin sheep. They don't, they shed out their wool." And I said, "Well, I guess we're in the meat business then." And so I knew very little about it. And at the time, all I knew was that the sheep would be good for the land if we got it right. And so we kind of stumbled our way into it. So that's 11:30. I'm going to put my email address and my name here in the chat. And if anybody wants to shoot me questions, I'd be happy to answer them as I can. And I hope you found it helpful and informative. And anybody out there looking to get into regenerative ag at any level, whether it's farmer or distributor or, producer, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Jesse, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. And we do have your contact information is also at solarfest.org. So we have your email and your website there for anyone who's looking to get in touch. So